So, hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Yale College Voices. And for those who don't know me, I'm your host, Doris Corey. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, my colleague, Ferentz Lafargue. So, welcome, Ferentz. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, Ferentz, I'm going to read your bio and then we'll just have a conversation. So,
Sounds great.
awesome. All right. So, Ferentz is Yale College's Associate Dean of Residential College Life. Prior to stepping into this role in July of 2023, Ferentz was Saybrook College's Residential College Dean from 2018 to 2023. He also serves as the director of Yale College's Mellon and Edward A. Bouchet undergraduate fellowship programs. Much of Ferentz's work in higher education centers around infusing what he refers to as the three pillars of student life on campus. And these include helping a student develop a sense of self, a sense of place, and a sense of responsibility. In other words, who am I, where am I, and what am I called to do? Therefore, whether the setting is a one-to-one meeting with a student, a group training session with Yale College's first-year counselors, or FROCOs as we call it here at Yale College, or being present as the Mellon and Bouchet students present their work, Ferentz is always actively looking for opportunities to facilitate students thriving, inching closer to their goals, and finding a way to embrace where they are currently. Where they are currently present, be it in their residential college or the city of New Haven more broadly. So Ferentz is also an author. So he's the author of Songs in the Key of My Life. His writing has appeared in many venues such as 215 Mag, America's Quarterly, The Huffington Post, Next American City, Social Science Research Council, and Social Text Periscope. Ferentz's work outside of academia also extends into ventures as varied as district marketing. From 2007 to 2009, he served as director of the organization Nostrand Park, which was devoted to promoting small businesses and the arts along the Nostrand Avenue corridor in Crown Heights. Prior to completing his PhD in African American and American Studies at Yale University, Ferentz earned a BA in Africana Studies and English at Queens College, CUNY. The list of colleges and universities where he has either delivered presentations or served on staff include the Catholic University of America, Williams College, Eugene Lang College, Dartmouth College, University of California, Irvine, University of California, Riverside, Tufts University, and Wesleyan University. And so here are a couple things that I learned about Ferentz that I didn't know until now. So Ferentz, you're currently working on 2 manuscripts?
Yes, and I think that's as aspirational as much as anything.
Yeah. Great. I can't wait to hear more. And you're also of Haitian descent? So
Yes.
I'd love to hear more about that when we have our conversation. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this today and being a brave soul of all of our podcast guests. So I'm really happy that you decided to join me today.
It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So can you share some insights just about maybe growing up or your early college years and how that shaped your values and interests?
Yes. So I was born in Haiti, but I grew up in Jamaica, Queens,
Ah.
New York.
Mhm.
So I migrated to the United States when I was 5 years old, and I've lived either, now New Haven actually is on the verge of eclipsing New York City as the place that I've lived the longest.
Mhm.
Um, so it's my parents, and I have one younger sibling.
Mhm.
I can't call him my little brother
Yeah.
anymore. He's a grown man,
Uh-huh.
nor am I young enough to be just saying like little. So we grew up, went to public schools all my life, and I tell people that Yale, when I came here as a graduate student, was the first school that I ever attended where I couldn't walk from my parents' apartment in Queens,
Oh, yeah.
or at least it'd be a very long walk,
Right.
if I did try it. But went to Jamaica High School,
Mhm.
which I really loved.
Mhm.
Got a chance to play uh, baseball in high school, and I really found, I think, one of my first real passions, which was journalism.
Mhm.
So I worked at the school newspaper. I worked for a citywide paper. Did
Mhm.
several journalism internships both
Mhm.
in high school and college.
Mhm.
And really, when I first went to Queens College, I thought that I was going there with with the aspiration of one day becoming a sports columnist for
Oh, really?
one of the New York papers.
Oh, wow.
I envisioned that I'd be spending a good chunk of my adult life covering the Knicks, Yankees, or any of the New York teams that I
Mhm.
grew up
Mhm.
watching and enjoying. But my first year, I had a wonderful English professor, June Bobb,
Mhm.
who I'm still very close to.
Mhm.
And she put the idea of graduate school and pursuing a PhD
Oh, wow.
into my mind. And I didn't embrace it at first. I'm going to be honest about that. I was like,
Mhm.
no, I'm here to be a journalist. But by the time that I was sophomore year, the idea of spending an incredible amount of time reading stuff that I
Mhm.
love and writing about things that I enjoy,
Mhm.
just became so tantalizing. And so, yeah, I did a Mellon Mays fellowship when I was an undergraduate at Queens College,
Ah.
which helped me to set the path for doing the PhD in African American Studies.
Mhm.
And the other thing that experience at Queens College really taught me was that I was really interested. I didn't know it at the time,
Yeah.
in what is, I guess now, student life or student affairs. I spent a great amount of time helping different campus organizations do programming.
Mhm.
I worked for the college newspaper. I was
Mhm.
an editor at the paper,
Oh,
um, and teaching and maybe even at the K through 12 level was something
mhm.
that always stayed in the back of my mind.
Really?
And what I was I didn't realize this at the time, but I guess what I was really looking to reconcile was, how do I find a way to do these things that I really, really enjoy?
Mhm.
Um, Being in a school or classroom setting and working with young people.
Oh, interesting.
And over time, I think I ended up finding the spaces in a career, whether it was serving as a literature professor or over the last, decade and a half
Mhm.
being an administrator in a different number of capacities at
Mhm.
colleges and universities, which have allowed me to get some time in the classroom, get a significant amount of sort of one-on-one and kind of student development time, as well, and
Mhm.
working with students both in and out of the classroom.
Mhm.
So it's kind of how I got to the point where I am today.
Oh, that's awesome. And so what before you completed your PhD, like all of the experience you had prior to that, like how did it shape into your community engagement and advocacy and things like that?
Um, I was the first person in my family to go to
Oh,
college.
really? Wow.
Um, so I didn't have a blueprint for what I was doing.
Mhm.
So a lot of the things that I did or I've done in my life have been trial and error.
Mhm. Mhm.
I've had really great mentors, but at the same time, there was not an immediate blueprint
Mhm.
for what I was trying to do. But there was one thing that always stood out, that I benefited greatly from people who uh, looked out for me, people who either took me under their wing, both directly or indirectly. And I always had a sense, a feeling, or a desire to give back.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so from the time that I was in high school,
Mhm.
working as not working, but volunteering in my church. I grew up
Mhm.
Catholic.
Mhm.
I coached CYO basketball for
Oh,
several years,
really?
both in high school and college. Um, you know, Later on in life, I would volunteer. I remember the first time that it really hit me that early childhood education or sort of
Mhm.
elementary education was not my calling.
Yeah.
I was doing an after school
Mhm.
program for third graders
Mhm.
essentially, and the program was basically to have them do a mini production
Mhm.
and using poetry as a way of getting them interested and excited about
Mhm.
writing.
Mhm.
And with the goal of the production, sort of the performance, they
Mhm.
were great.
Yeah.
Uh, they were there every week.
Mhm.
They were excited every time
Mhm.
that they did the reading. We would read the a verse or two from the poem we're doing. This was in Brooklyn, so I remember as a series of June Jordan poems, and uh, and they were really good at that part.
Mhm.
But the day after the presentation, I
Mhm.
remember going back to the program and I said, "All right, we're gonna." They said, we're gonna, this is what we're reading today." And they said, "No, we're not." I was like, "Wait a minute, no, 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 this is what we're reading."
Yeah.
And they just started running around.
Really?
And the other thing is that the stage, was also, what the auditorium was also the gym
Yeah,
of
yeah.
this school. So they're like, no,
Yeah.
we're playing dodgeball.
Right.
They were jumping off the stage,
Uh-huh.
and there was no way that felt as if I
Yeah.
knew how to reel them in. I was like,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
The community service thing is still I'm still down for that.
Yeah.
But if I ever had any aspirations of being an elementary school
Right.
teacher, that was wiped away at that moment.
Interesting.
Um, but I but at the same time, I just really liked it. I just really
Yeah,
liked the
yeah.
opportunity to get to know these other folks who
Right.
were in my community who I would, outside of maybe this context,
Yeah.
not you know
Not
not
interact.
not
Yeah.
interact with them
Mhm.
as closely.
Right, right. Yeah, it's always interesting. Uh, it takes it's a special talent to deal with with elementary like energy level,
Yes,
and their attention span and all of those things. So
it takes a great amount of creativity.
yeah, yeah, to keep them engaged all the time. Um, so yeah, it was really fascinating to hear that about your journey. So, um, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about, you mentioned that you had mentors and people who looked out for you during your college years, and
Mhm.
that you were a first gen student. Um, so I'm curious, how did you find those mentors, or did they seek you out, or did you have to seek out that information, or how that came about?
Um, uh, it grew out of a variety of different things.
Mhm.
One, a lot of children of immigrants have similar stories,
Mhm.
especially if they're from countries where, at least in relation to the United States,
Mhm.
English is not the primary language. So, as a young person, I remember as young as 7 or 8 years old,
Mhm.
I was translating documents for
Mm.
my parents.
Mhm.
I was on the phone with, I was calling the phone company,
Yeah.
uh, you know,
Handling business.
various
Yeah.
utilities. I remember, strangely, I think maybe in third or fourth grade, talking to my parents' accountant
Mm.
around tax season, and I'm like,
Wow. Wow.
it's bizarre, sort of
Yeah.
seems surreal to me now.
Mhm.
And so what that did, which ironically was sort of a contradiction to a lot of kind of, what might be some of the cultural norms in
Mhm.
a Haitian or in a Caribbean community,
Mhm.
where a young person, a child, is expected to stay out of adults' business.
Right.
But here I
In this
was,
case, you had
I'm
to
in the
be,
thick of their
right.
business, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I just
It was
got,
a necessity.
it was definitely a
Yeah.
necessity. But so it made me comfortable
Hmm.
talking to adults.
Interesting.
And so I'd have conversations with my teachers,
Hmm.
and it just never dawned on me
Yeah.
that that's what teachers, the principals, um, I had an after school job pretty earlier
Oh,
on.
wow.
So I think I was 13 when
Yeah.
I started working after school at
That's
a
great.
dry cleaners,
Hmm.
and everyone in there, all the customers who were coming in were
Hmm.
adults. So I just
Hmm.
got used to talking
Right.
to folks
Hmm.
and asking them questions about themselves.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
kind of, I think, the journalist in me and the storyteller.
Right.
Was just curious, and that sort of transferred into, I think, people taking some interest in me.
Yeah.
Some of it was, who's this kid that's
You just
just talking to us and
asking
asking
questions. Yeah.
and asking questions, and then occasionally it's like, oh, okay, maybe this is a person who
Right.
has something to say,
Hmm.
and we could look into.
Hmm.
And growing up, the whole idea of kind of mentorship and people looking out for uh, me, and a
Hmm.
person like me sort of emerged in so many different ways. I
Hmm.
remember, um, I think it was it was my first year in college. So I
Hmm.
would take the bus. So Queens College is, or at least at the time that I was there, was entirely a commuter school.
Hmm.
So, and I was still living at home in my parents' house, and I would occasionally still work in the afternoons at the cleaners.
Hmm.
And one day I was working, and one of the guys, one of the customers came into the store, and he says to me, and somebody told me that you were out on the block at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I go, yeah. I was waiting for the bus.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had, I think a lot of the students here could relate to this. I was taking a French class, and
Hmm.
language classes are notoriously early in the mornings. I
Right.
said, yeah, I was waiting for the bus to go to school.
Hmm.
He goes, oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense,
Ah.
because I know that you're not one of those knuckleheads, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's not you.
Hmm.
And it struck me. I was like, wait a minute. Here's this person who, um, yeah, definitely knows me from the context of this cleaners,
Right.
but his impulse when uh, he sensed or sort of got any information that I might be doing something that I
Right.
shouldn't be engaged in,
Right.
was to come out and check me
And
on it.
talk to, yeah.
And I really appreciated that.
Right. Right.
And it just dawned on me how many other folks outside of my teachers and instructors who
Hmm.
took that level
Yeah.
of interest to making sure, even though I was never straying from the right path, was making
Hmm.
sure that indeed was remaining true.
Right. Right.
And that level of, accountability, the kind of each one teach one, it takes a village.
Yeah.
Those are things that I brought with me
Hmm.
into so many of the classroom settings as a student,
Hmm.
and I think in many ways as myself as an educator. So when I got to college and I found a professor that
Hmm.
I liked, I just did
Just
what I always
approach.
did.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just talked to them.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. I love that story because, and this has come up in other episodes where, there are some students just like you who they just have that knack for, uh, hey, just start a conversation and get to know people and ask questions
Hmm.
and don't have a problem doing that. And then there are other folks who, and I've mentioned this in earlier episodes where they're more on the introverted side and maybe don't know who to reach out to, or maybe they do and they're just shy, or
Hmm.
um so I'm curious about, how did you pull all of your experience, like everything you just mentioned, into mentoring students who are like that, who are maybe less extroverted, and or shy, or introverts, or um nervous about asking for help or mentoring. So how do you pull that experience into what you do now and as your role in the college?
It's it's difficult. It's a constant evolution. Most
Mhm.
people who know me would probably say, actually, pretty much everyone who knows me tends to say that I'm quiet or fairly reserved. And then there are hosts, after a while,
Yeah.
they really get to know me. They're like, oh, he's a straight fool. Um, so there's a bit of that
Right.
to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I realized from having also the habit or of just sitting back and listening,
Mm.
um, is that the person who's talking is not necessarily um, the one who is the smartest in the room
Mhm,
or
mhm.
the one who deserves to be the leader or driving the conversation.
Mm,
And I say this to students
mhm.
quite often when they uh, if a student hasn't been participating in class and they're saying that they're lost or that the questions that are being asked are not things that they're following,
Mm.
and I try to get them to realize, well, as a professor, if you're not asking the question, it's hard for us to answer.
Mhm, mhm.
And if you're not asking questions, we're taking the class or the conversation in a number of different places
Right.
based on the feedback.
The interaction.
So much of teaching and working with young people is
Mhm.
a call and response.
Mm.
On a one-to-one level, it takes a just level of patience and being able to sit in silence or sit in the discomfort of silence at
Mhm,
times
mhm,
to allow people the space to start talking and to come
mhm,
out. But when we're talking about group settings,
mhm.
it's finding and creating opportunities to allow those who don't talk the most,
Mhm.
students who are maybe very reserved or introverted, or
Yeah.
anyone, even if it's not students, we're talking within the
Mhm,
context
mhm.
of colleagues too, an opportunity to share their voices.
Right, right.
There are times when I've been very much blessed where I didn't say anything during a class or a
Mhm,
meeting, and when I finally spoke, I, I felt really affirmed,
mhm, mhm.
and so I always remember those
Yeah.
experiences. So I try to do the same for others,
Mhm,
and then over time, as a educator, you just begin to realize, like, okay, how do I meet students? How do I meet them where they are?
mhm, mhm.
How do I create a classroom space where it's not just a person with the highest verbal acuity who
Mhm,
is going to be driving or leading?
mhm.
What are other ways or other models of leadership or
Mhm.
being at the forefront
Right.
that we can amplify,
Mhm.
we can put forward as models and allow, um, uh, invite other folks to emulate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And I love that because um e- even from my own personal experience, stepping outside of my comfort zone, doing the podcast as we were talking about on the way over here. Um, I primarily, I'll do the tech stuff and I'll, behind the scenes, but
Hmm.
doing this, it was a step outside of comfort zone for me because I've never done it before. What really didn't have an interest in doing a podcast.
Or
But it,
maybe you did it in a different medium. I
yeah,
think maybe a lot of the work that you do in terms of communications, kind of web design and
mm,
imaging, is really bringing out stories and
yeah, that's true.
bringing out narratives,
Hmm.
but just in a different way. So
Right.
you've been talking to people at the university, but just in a different
In different
context.
contexts. Yeah, that's very true. And I wanted to touch on a couple things that you had mentioned a few minutes ago, just to kind of taking a step back in terms of your childhood and being an interpreter, basically for your family and for your parents. That actually came up too in a previous episode with Daisy Abreu. Um, and it was almost like you became an adult in a sense,
Yeah.
at age, what you said 4 was the
Eight,
first time you, or
age,
8,
8 or 9.
8 or
Yeah.
9. Yeah. Like in terms of interpreting important information for others. And so I imagine that in doing so, you, it was almost like you not only are you interpreting language wise, but you're interpreting in a way that your parents felt comfortable or accepted, and how that kind of carried over into the approach that you mentioned in terms of how you
Hmm.
work with students. um, so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more, since we're talking about your current role. um,
Oh, one more thing
oh
though.
yes,
One
yes.
thing that in h- both I grew to learn in hindsight
Hmm.
about that experience
Hmm.
is that I didn't realize what were so it made me good at being an advocate for
Hmm.
myself, but only to a certain level,
Mm.
because there are things that I just didn't know
Hmm.
about in the world
Right.
that I couldn't, or I didn't know to aspire to.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yes, when it
Yeah.
came time to, we talked about our kids, who are both in the New Haven public school system.
Hmm.
When my kids are now applying for schools, I'm filling out all the applications.
Right.
When I
Right.
was their age, I was the one filling out. So
Wow.
there are things that I did not know to
Yes.
look for.
Yes.
New York City has, specialized high schools,
Hmm.
for example, and so I knew that they existed,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I didn't know that it was how to prepare for the test, how to take a test, when to
Yeah.
take a test.
Right.
Um, those were things that just I was like, well,
Yeah.
I know somebody who
Yeah.
went to
Right.
Stuyvesant, and I'm
Yeah.
um, and that uh, I wouldn't say it placed a cap or a ceiling,
Hmm.
or at least one that couldn't be moved.
Hmm.
But it did put some parameters that I didn't know at
Right.
the time because, um, there are things that as confident that I was at times as a student, I am still not an adult. And, so there was never case or the feeling that my parents were coming back in as
Hmm.
the cavalry.
Hmm.
If there was something that I was really questioning,
Hmm. Hmm.
about, whether it was my schooling um, or even when I was, trying to advocate for them at times,
Hmm.
um, people were like, "Oh yeah, we're talking to this kid,"
Hmm.
and he's not an accountant, he's not a
Hmm.
lawyer.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
whatever he watched on TV to learn about some legal jargon,
Yeah.
that's as much as we're gonna get out of him.
Really. So since you mentioned that, it's a topic that has come up before in previous episodes, is that some students just, we figured it out as we went along, because we didn't have the resources or understanding to ask, you know, to ask questions, but also to know who to ask questions. And that's, I know I touched on being reserved or introverted, but um, in in my own experience, there were certain things that I figured out, like I could figure out on my own, but there are other things that I thought I was figuring out on my own, but I really had no idea and didn't have a mentor available to help guide me along the way. So there were opportunities that I missed because I didn't even realize they were available, or what I had to do to apply for these things. And so now, like you said, I approach it differently with my own children. um so I'm curious, since you mentioned that, how do you guide students now here at Yale College? And I know there are all sorts of resources, and I mean, there's a wealth of resources available, and uh, the key is communicating that to students, but also, um, I've always been curious. It's sort of I always hear about students don't like emails. They don't, they don't want to read emails. So how have you managed to communicate these things to students, and to let them know what they do have available to them as Yale College students, and what the resources are here?
It's it's so nuanced
Mhm.
because to to part of your point
Mhm.
that there are just so many resources
Mhm.
on campus.
Mhm.
The the sheer volume of resources can sometimes be overwhelming
Overwhelming, yeah.
um, to anyone on this campus,
Right.
students, staff,
Mhm.
and if you are not, if you didn't grow up in a culture or a space
Mhm.
where things felt abundant,
Mm.
it's hard to be able to navigate or really appreciate. And I don't mean appreciate
Mhm.
in like or
Yeah, yeah.
dislike,
Mhm.
but appreciate in terms of being able to really absorb and build upon,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So I always take that into consideration,
Mhm. Mhm.
that there are students who know these things are out there
Mhm.
and who maybe sometimes just for good reasons don't want to engage
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
There are those who don't know, and that's kind of a simpler thing. It's a little bit of, hey, did you know you can
Right.
go here?
Right.
Did you know that you can go to the Porvu Center and find a writing partner,
Mm.
learn more about writing tutoring, or find a tutor for one of your quantitative classes or a
Mhm.
science class,
Mhm.
or you're dealing with a breakup? Okay. Do you know we have this great program called Yale College Community
Mhm.
Cares, YC3? There
Mhm.
are these wellness specialists who can talk you through uh, this thing that feels life shattering in the moment,
Right.
but which you really can persevere and
Mhm.
you have all the skills.
Right.
Um, it is just a matter of being able to talk to someone. You know, you're really interested in uh, African American studies. Well, we have a whole
Mhm.
department of scholars,
Right.
and whether you're interested in it from a musical perspective, art
Mm.
history, literature,
Mhm.
political science, there are all these folks you can go talk to.
Right. Right.
Um, so there's that, right?
Yeah.
There's also the fact often we find ourselves, when overwhelmed, just frozen.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where do I go? What do I do?
Mhm.
And is this just a point where I need the space
Yeah.
and the time to not act? Um, and I've learned over time to be patient with students in that regard too.
Mhm.
I- Early on in my career, it was a lot of, oh, we got to,
Mhm.
you got to do this now. You got to do
Right.
this
Right.
now. Time is,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're only here for for 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Do it while you're young,
Do it while you're
and
young. But now I've come to be more of, okay, I recognize that you're going to do this at your own time.
Mhm.
How can I support you in that? How can we allow you to pace yourself in a
Mhm.
way that's comfortable to you,
Mhm.
but doesn't undermine your long term objectives?
Right. Right.
While I'm by no means um, 100% accurate on this. What about my perspective, just in terms of experience,
Mm-hmm.
being older?
Mm-hmm.
Can I offer that might be able to inform some of the ramifications
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of these decisions?
Yeah.
Realizing that ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many components of our backgrounds that are going to
Yeah.
be that are very different in terms
Right.
of how you experience these things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and if I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that could be, that's a blessing too, right?
Right.
That,
Right.
you're not going to be faced by this obstacle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in the event that I'm right, or my experience, or what I've learned from others is
Mm-hmm.
accurate, I'm sharing with you some insight that
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that I wished maybe in some cases someone had shared with me,
Mm.
or someone
Yes.
had shared, or someone else in your perspective
Right.
probably wishes someone had shared with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And as you were speaking, it literally reminded me. I told you my son's 20, so
Hmm.
um, we've had these conversations where I had a moment right around his senior year going into college, and I had to realize that he's not my clone. It was that this realization came over me, like he's not my clone. He's not. Um, my chance to do everything I didn't do in college, and realizing that this is his journey, and I'm here to facilitate that, but not try to craft his journey around all of the things I didn't get to do. Or
Hmm.
yeah, it was funny when I came to this realization, because I actually felt a little guilty, because imagining the pressure that he probably felt, with all of these things that I said, yeah, I was so on it about, you have to do this and do that while you're young, and you have time,
Hmm.
you have
Hmm.
all the time in the world. And yeah, and it's so true. It's like everyone's different, right? And realizing that everyone's journey is different.
Right.
And even with my own child, his journey is just different from mine. And giving him the space to uh figure things out, and figure out what he wants to do, and all of those things, without the pressure,
Right.
without that pressure.
I learned that I was confronted with that fairly early on, and continue to be confronted with it
Mhm.
through various stages of parenting.
Mhm.
My brother is 6 years younger than me. So when he was applying to college, by that time, I was, I think, a second year graduate student or
Mhm.
something like that.
Mhm.
And I remember, this was back in the day when the college guides was that
Yeah.
big, thick
The giant.
Princeton, the Princeton guide and the
Right.
USA Today list of
Mhm.
colleges. And so I did the, thing that any other big brother who's
Yes, yes.
now attending an Ivy League school
Mhm.
would do.
Mhm.
I got, I got the Princeton one, and I got the
Right,
US
right.
US News and World Reports. That's the colleges.
Mhm.
I got those for him, and I was very kind of sort of hawkish
Yes.
over um, his application essay,
Yes.
something no
Mhm.
one really did for me, at least
Right.
no one in the house.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
hawkish, and how he had to, don't just apply to the CUNY and
Uh-huh.
SUNY schools.
Mhm.
SUNY's the State University of New York. It's the
Mhm.
uh, uh, other 4-year college system. Um, I said, there are these schools out
Yeah, yeah.
there. There are these small liberal arts colleges.
Right.
There's this place called Amherst.
Mhm. Mhm.
This other place in I remember, I was like, Swarthmore,
Right, right.
Bowdoin, and
Yes.
you got to look into these
Yes.
things. Uh, you know, your experiences don't have to be like mine. I just know I've been out in the
Yeah.
world. And he said, I don't want to.
Yeah. Right.
And I said, what do you mean you don't want
Yeah,
to?
yeah.
He said, I don't want to.
Yeah.
And what really got me,
Mhm.
he said, look, you went to Queens College.
Mhm.
You seem to be doing a pretty good job.
Right, right. He turned out great.
You seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Why do I need to sort of create this stress?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't need to take on debt. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, all right. You're
Yeah.
so there's
It's that realization.
there's that realization that for me it was like, oh my gosh, my younger brother can have a whole different
Yeah,
experience,
yeah.
all these things.
Right,
And he did end up having a very different experience because
right,
he's a different person.
right.
But he was also the way that he was informed by my decisions
Mhm.
was not necessarily the way that I was trying to project them out.
Right.
And as you mentioned, just
Mhm.
time and again, that lesson comes back up
Yeah, yeah.
as a parent, and as a friend,
Mhm.
as a educator. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
like you're right.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It's like that's it's a hard realization, right? It's because when at least for me, when I think back, whether there were, mistakes or missteps and things that I wish I knew along the way, or because I'm always imagining where would I be if I had done just this one thing, and yeah, but it was a hard realization for me to say, "Look, it's not my journey, like this is someone else's journey." Um, but giving him space so that they know that I can help facilitate whatever they want their
Hmm.
journey to be, not what not what I want the journey to be. So it was a tough, that moment. It was like an aha moment, and realizing that this is his life. It's not it's not mine.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and that's real.
mhm.
And it's one of those things where what it is hard for in this case, that your child or loved one to realize is, I just really want the best for
Right,
you.
you just want the best, right?
Um,
Exactly.
and what's hard for us, or as you as a person
Mhm,
giving the advice or trying to shield or protect,
mhm.
is there's gonna be a time where you just don't know
Right,
what's best.
right. That's true too. It's very true, and yeah, and that's what it boils down to. Even so, whether it's your children or working with the students, it's like you just want the best for them, and hope to help
Hmm.
them achieve whatever that is. Um, so it's just really inspiring, and so I'm curious, was there sort of when you think back on what, I don't even know how many thousands of students that you've probably worked with over the years, uh, but is there like a specific success story that immediately comes to mind when you think of all the students that you helped along the way?
Um, what I was not fully prepared for,
Mhm.
and which I am really relishing now, is watching my students um, become. I taught high school for
Mhm.
several years. Uh, I taught first year college classes.
Mhm.
So watching my students just become full on adults
Adults,
and
yeah.
just having these lives.
Right.
The other day, I was on Instagram and I saw one of my students with his two daughters. He had
Mhm.
posted a series of pictures of them just playing, him rolling
Mhm.
around with them and playing out. And he was a great person when he was in college.
Mhm.
But I was just
Yeah, yeah.
he had a yeah, his
His
beard
beard,
now
yeah.
was had some gray in it, and I would go, "Oh my gosh,
Right,
like
right.
this is just beautiful. This is
Yeah,
just
yeah.
a beautiful thing to behold."
Mhm, mhm,
Um, I had students get prominent awards,
mhm, mhm.
and just like the sense of one of my former students won a Pulitzer a couple years ago, and I
Oh,
was like, "Oh
wow.
my gosh!"
That's
I
amazing.
was like, "That's great, we
I know,
won!"
right,
I
yeah.
was like, "We won it!"
Yeah.
I was like, "My, those essays you wrote
Yeah,
for my
yes.
class, I'm
That is
sure they
great.
helped." But
That's awesome.
it's just watching them step into their own truths,
Right, right.
um, uh, because of social media.
Mhm,
I they some of them will keep up with me. Some of
mhm,
them will. So I've been to weddings, seen
uh-huh.
weddings, seen them like bounce back
Yeah.
from
From
loss
yeah,
and
yeah.
grief.
Right.
Uh, Seen them take risks that
Mhm.
I would not have
Right.
foreseen.
Yeah.
But it just makes me so inspired. And then there are
Yeah.
times when the risks that they're taking, I'm like, wow, this is great. I mean, like,
Yeah.
this is, talking about the sort of the things that you wish you'd done. Like,
Right.
this is the kind of stuff that I wish that,
Yeah.
that I had made occasional decision to. Like, I wish I had
Mhm.
tried that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so those are kinds of the success stories, just
Mhm.
watching them grow into their own.
Yeah, yeah.
And occasionally, there are one or two who will call me and share an anecdote, something that
Mhm.
I probably had not even noted at the time,
Wow, yeah.
and so those are always
Yeah.
amazing too.
Oh, that's awesome. Because yeah, because I can only imagine that it could be something small that you've done along the way, and you don't even realize, whatever impact you had on the student at the time, and it resonated with them for some reason over the years. And this has come up in other episodes too, where it's like just that uh, interaction that you had with the student can just have this lifelong uh, impact, which is amazing because and then for them to remember, like just to reach out to you years later,
Hmm.
um, shows that, whatever time that you spent with them was meaningful, and
Yeah.
that's an amazing feeling to think, oh, the work I do. And I'm sure that there are days where it's like, yeah, you're just doing the work, but you forget like this has a really long-term effect, and that's a amazing feeling. So
Yes, yes, absolutely. There are times that I'll just stumble upon a story about a student. Like,
mhm.
oh wow, that is just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So that's great. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about your authoring. So the book you authored, "Songs in the Key of My Life," which I love that title. And of course, I immediately think of Stevie Wonder. So,
Yep.
so I'm curious if you could tell us about that book, and then also how your writing sort of intersects with your work here in the college.
So, Songs in the Key of My Life
Mhm,
is inspired by the Stevie Wonder album Songs in the Key of
mhm,
Life.
mhm,
And it's a series of vignettes about memorable songs connected to memorable moments in life.
mhm.
The genesis, like so many pieces of art, was a breakup,
Ah,
and where after where I spent a lot of times listening to Stevie Wonder,
mhm,
listening to songs in Key of Life in
mhm,
particular, and I started thinking about other, other
mhm,
songs, and to sort of in the same way that that album brought back so many memories of that relationship. I
Mm-hmm.
needed to think of other songs so
Mm-hmm.
that I could think of,
Mm-hmm.
so I could pull myself out
Right.
of the, you know,
The aftermath
the
and
aftermath, and um, and I just kind of like an idea, jotted down some notes, and
mm-hmm.
one day I happened to be at a holiday party, as it
Mm-hmm.
were, and uh, met a book editor, Clarence Haynes, and Clarence was like, "Yeah, you working on anything?" I said, "I just got this idea, like
Mm-hmm.
this book, songs in the key of my life. You ever heard Stevie Wonder?" He's like, "I love Stevie Wonder,"
Right.
and he says,
Yeah.
if you get that, if you ever, I want to see it. As soon as you write something down,
Oh, that's
well,
so
I don't
cool.
care if it's a table of contents,
Uh-huh.
just a outline, and sure enough, I did, and we
Oh,
were
that's so
able to
cool.
work on the project.
Yeah.
It was great. It was
Yeah.
an opportunity to really be self reflective.
Mm-hmm.
It was cathartic in a
Mm-hmm.
number of different ways. Um, what I didn't realize at the time going into it
Mm-hmm.
was how my mother became a main character in the
Mm.
book,
Interesting.
just because her lively personality related to music. So one of the anecdotes, one of the vignettes is about the Billy Ocean song "Caribbean
Mm-hmm.
Queen,"
Mm-hmm.
and I talked about how my mother used to say Billy Ocean was her husband, and she had so was Smokey Robinson,
Yeah,
so was
yeah.
Marvin Gaye, but there's always this image that sort of sticks out in my mind
Mhm,
of her with her very thick Haitian accent,
mhm.
just going Caribbean
Yeah.
Queen, boom, 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 and for a while I thought that was the song
Yeah,
Caribbean
yeah.
Queen, boom, 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 uh, and stories like that. I
Yeah,
was like, okay, there's this joy.
right.
It sounds cliche, but there is really this sort of joy and a full range of emotions that
Yes,
music pulls out
absolutely.
of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so that was a great opportunity. I had done both in high school and college some not extensive music writing,
Mhm,
a couple of album
mhm,
reviews and profiles of artists. And so I was able to tap into that.
mhm,
I've written a fair number of personal essays.
mhm,
And so what I often felt that if I wasn't a sports writer,
mhm.
my other genre probably would have been memoir or personal essays.
Mhm.
And so some of this just came natural. It was like,
Yeah,
okay, I like music.
right.
Um, I could tease out stories about my everyday life,
Mhm.
and it really worked out well.
Oh, that's amazing. I agree. Like music, like you said, it may sound cliche, but I think it's the one thing that connects everyone is
Hmm.
that, you know, for me, um, if I were to write a memoir, it would be guided by like this is the song, this is
Hmm.
the song that came out during that time, and I remember that summer,
Hmm.
or whatever happened.
Hmm.
And that's been like the timeline, but it connects all of us because it just resonates that emotion, just everything. Like I can think of smells, you know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
the breeze, like or whatever the weather may have been that day, things like that.
When I was on the doing the book events for the book, there was my reading,
Mhm.
and then whether it was during the book signing portion or just the talk back,
Mhm.
the audience always, I was just m- more captivated by the stories that the
Oh, wow.
people would just tell and share
Mhm.
about, songs that meant a lot to them.
Right.
And so there are at times where I'm like, I'd just be sort of in the front, and it goes, no, please just say
Yeah, like
more.
share. Yeah.
This just sounds amazing.
Right,
Like,
right.
so yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I didn't know that about you. Are there other artists that uh resonate for you, or your favorite artists?
Um, I have yeah,
Mm,
there are a couple artists
mhm,
that take me to different places.
mm, mhm,
Um, there are a couple of Haitian compa
mhm,
musicians
mhm,
from like the uh, big bands from the 70s, Tabu Combo,
mhm,
Tropicana,
mhm.
or even Kassav. Like whenever uh, I hear those songs,
Mhm.
whenever I hear them,
Yeah.
those artists, I'm transported back to
Really.
my parents' living room
Mhm,
on a
mhm,
Saturday or Sunday morning,
mhm,
and my dad has sort of put on, turned on his stereo,
mhm.
gotten his, started putting on some records,
Yep, yep.
and that will just play,
Yeah.
for four to
All
five
day.
hours
Yeah.
straight.
All day.
Or when I was, I remember on Sunday mornings cleaning the house, and those records would be playing in the background.
Mhm.
Um, Bob Marley
Yeah.
is another person. Is like one of the, I think first sort of crossover artists
Mhm,
that my parents would play in the house.
mhm,
So there was Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" album in
mhm,
the house,
mhm.
Michael Jackson Thriller,
Yes.
and so those are like those musicians
Mhm.
make me um, think of home.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there a slew of artists, a Tribe Called Quest,
Oh, yeah.
Lauryn Hill,
Yes.
uh, the Fugees,
Yes.
Black Sheep,
Mhm,
um, that remind me of uh, being in
mhm.
college, latter half of high school,
Right.
being young and just
Right.
or young in that way,
Mhm, mhm.
and feeling as if like you know everything was possible,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there are all these doors
Mhm,
to be left open,
mhm.
yet to be open.
Right.
And then there are other artists, um, uh, Ella Fitzgerald,
Mhm, mhm,
um, Sarah Vaughan,
mhm, mhm.
um, like, Nina Simone,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
in particular,
Mhm,
Cesaria Evora,
mhm,
uh, who sort of remind me of like being at peace,
mm.
um, the feeling of just stepping back and um, looking into the world.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, all stuff that I love. I love all the artists that you mentioned. And I could even share for myself, for folks who don't know me, but most people know that I'm a huge Prince fan.
Oh yeah.
And I think for for multiple reasons. Like I think probably the biggest reason I think that I really just gravitated towards his music was just being yourself. Like
Mm-hmm.
to me, he had the
Mm-hmm.
audacity
Mm-hmm.
to do what he wanted to do and be what he wanted to be and present himself the way he wanted. And he did it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of his music was about
Yeah, self-expression and
yeah,
being yourself.
self-expression. And I always admired that. It's almost like I wish I could be that. But yeah, the same thing. Every song is probably a timeline of
Yep.
my life. And yeah, it really that resonates for me because again, I think music is a, at least one common thread that
Hmm.
everyone experiences in a certain way. And it's actually come up in some of our previous episodes where we have you mentioned writing and sharing your story. Um, and it's interesting to see, like, oh, we have a lot of, we have some poets here, we have
Hmm.
musicians in Yale College, and again, it's that common thread that just kind of connects everyone. That's really interesting. So I'm wondering, we're kind of jumping back, and I realize we passed our hour, but I do have a few more questions for you. Um, and I wanted to hear more about, I know you wear different hats here at Yale College, but also outside of Yale College. And so I'm curious if all of these projects that you're involved with and the different hats that you wear here at the college, how they influence each other.
I've, um, because of all the hats I wear in
Yeah.
college, I've a lot of the stuff that I used to be involved in more broadly.
Mhm.
This is maybe a lesson for some of our students
Mhm.
too. I've learned to say no. I've learned to
Yes.
pull back
Right.
from a lot of things
Hmm.
over time.
Hmm.
But some of the experiences that professional experiences that I've had, or at least I'm kind of outside of academia, that I've really enjoyed or been really influential in. And um, so there's a point where I gave a lot of thought to working on in politics or in government
Oh,
and
really?
communications.
Hmm.
So I written some
Hmm.
op-eds
Hmm.
for elected officials, and I really, thought that there was a opportunity
Hmm.
um, to kind of do that. I don't think as a long-term
Yeah.
career, but
Hmm.
definitely I was exploring stepping away from academia for a period just so that I could
Yeah.
try it, just so I could see
Right.
a different set of experiences.
Hmm.
And um, the to the degree that I was able to do that,
Hmm.
it was really fascinating.
Hmm.
I got a chance to see a little bit more closely inside of how sort of the government works, both on the local
Hmm.
level and on the kind of more broader federal level.
Hmm.
It was an opportunity to meet people who I would not have gotten as at that time. Most of the work that I was doing was as a literature professor. And so, as a literature professor, um, it wasn't like every day that I'd be spending a considerable amount of time with urban
Hmm.
planners
Hmm.
and policy folks,
Yeah. Yeah.
for example. And so that
Right.
was really good.
Yeah.
The other thing, and which I think was continues to be a lot very influential, or uh, was the work that I did with Nostrum Park.
Mm.
Um, like so many people in the early 2000s, I started a blog.
Mhm, mhm.
I left, finished graduate school, was working in New York, living in Brooklyn, and I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
everybody else has a blog. I
Right,
need a I
everyone's
need a I need a blog, and I
Yes,
started
yes.
this blog called Nostrum Park, which
Mhm,
just started out with some musings about what I was seeing happening around, and then because I was living in Prospect Heights and then
mhm,
Crown Heights in Brooklyn.
mhm.
And over time, engaging with other bloggers and just sort of looking at the neighborhood, people just started to say, "Hey,
Yeah.
you can build this thing out a little bit more. Like,
Mhm,
what are you trying to do?" So,
mhm,
what me and a good friend of mine, Laurel Brown, who came on board and as a partner in the project and ended up really doing some really great work with it after I left,
mhm,
created this. We're like, what we got finally settled on is the Nostrand Avenue corridor, at
mhm,
least in the part that we lived in Crown Heights.
mhm,
There were these it was filled with small businesses, many of whom were Caribbean owned.
Mhm.
Um, and we were very conscious of the prospect of incoming gentrification,
Mm.
particularly in
Mhm.
terms of how it could sort of change
Right.
the business landscape. And
Mhm.
so we sought to try to tell the story of these Caribbean shop owners, and the kind of this idea that Nostrand Park, or sorry, Nostrand Avenue, is
Mhm.
this Caribbean corridor.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, we're able to get some funding from Small Business Services. We were able to join a nonprofit incubator
Mm.
to do some work with the businesses, helping promote. Uh, uh, Laurel did this great district marketing campaign that basically, right, we're very much similar in the now that we think of pop-ups, or the night market
Right.
in
Right.
on Chapel,
Mhm.
or, and I guess there's also one on Orange. So
Mhm.
she
Mhm.
did one of those, took an
Yeah.
abandoned space,
Yeah.
and so it was just really amazing work,
Right.
and that project allowed me to see sort of how quickly, like, sort of people can galvanize. I mean,
Mhm.
there are people who weren't behind the idea. There were plenty
Mhm.
of people. There were plenty of naysayers too,
Right.
but there
Right.
are plenty of people who just backed it,
We're
and
supportive.
were really supportive,
Yeah.
and how quickly just that level of support
Mhm.
could inspire us and galvanize us. The other thing, it helped me. Design thinking was a big sort of topic, or sort
Mhm.
of language at the time, but it really helped me think as a designer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what do our public spaces look like?
Mm. Mhm.
Um, how do we want to think about communities? Um, so placemaking,
Mhm.
kind of design thinking,
Yeah.
those things, which again, things I
Mhm.
would not have been thinking of as I'm reading a Toni Morrison
Right.
or Gloria Naylor novel,
Mhm.
really came to life,
Mhm.
and I really appreciated the opportunity to sit with those kinds of ideas,
Mhm.
and also engage in something that was kind of different from my day to day.
Right. Right. That's really fascinating. I wish we had more time because I'd love to I'd love to hear more. But I'll ask some of my final questions for you, Ferenz. Tying this back to all of your experiences, tying them back to your work here with students, but also um, with staff. Our
Mhm.
colleagues. Um, just wondering if you sort of have a vision of what you would like to. Well, first, what are some of the key challenges that you've seen over the past maybe year or so for students and staff that interact with students? But then, do you have some ideas in terms of how we can address some of those challenges more effectively in the coming years?
And that goes back to what I often talk about, those three pillars: a sense of self, a sense of
Mm.
place, and a
Mm-hmm.
sense of responsibility.
Yeah, yeah.
That changes over time in terms of the population on a campus,
Right.
both the students, the staff, the faculty,
Mm-hmm.
um, and but for me, those are always the grounding questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is hard being um, a person,
Mm-hmm.
being a college student,
Mm-hmm.
being a parent,
Mm-hmm.
being a caretaker for your parents.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm not only I'm sort of very sort of on pins and needles because my
Mm-hmm.
father's in his 70s.
Right. Yes.
Um, so who am I at any given moment is
Mm-hmm.
changing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm afraid of that
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
my big age,
Yeah.
so I could understand and remember how I was afraid and anxious about that.
Mm.
Even though I embraced so many of the possibilities
Mm-hmm.
um, when I was 18 to 22.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, where am I?
Mm.
I'm slowly settling into being in New Haven. Like I said, I lived here for 6 years as a graduate student.
Mhm, mhm.
Now I'm in my sixth year here. Uh, sort of be, my daughters constantly ask me, "Are we Connecticutans? Like Connecticutans? Like
Yeah.
what?" I don't know what the term.
What the term, yeah. It
So
never rolls off the tongue when you say, you know?
yeah. So so the where am
Mhm.
I is um that's settling into, and I
Yeah,
understand sort of why that makes me uneasy at times, why
right.
that makes some students, whether they're homesick,
Yeah.
whether they're maybe not homesick, they're just
Mhm.
excited about the
About being
possibility
here,
of like,
yeah.
I'm going to leave home. Like,
Yes, yes.
I'm not going to go back to my hometown. Like, this
Right.
is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then the sense of responsibility.
Mm.
Uh, like, what are we called to do?
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and it's something that you grapple with as an
mhm,
18-year-old.
mhm.
It's something that you grapple with as a 28-year-old, a 48-year-old,
Yeah,
a
no matter what age,
50-year-old.
right?
What am I called to do? Like
Mhm.
right now, I feel like I'm
Yeah.
called to be the best dad that I can be.
Exactly.
I tell my students the
Mhm.
same dad jokes that
Yeah.
I tell my daughters,
Right, right.
and the students cringe just as much as my daughters do. So they're like, "Oh
Yes.
my gosh, he's at it again."
Right,
But
right.
like at the core, that's
Mhm.
what I feel like I'm really called to do at the moment.
Yeah.
So in effect, sort of that extends into um, how I extend myself
Mhm.
to colleagues and students, not in the sense of like wanting to be helpful
Mhm.
or parent, but more so wanting to create an environment where people can feel safe and heard, um, even if that's not what they always
Mhm.
are accustomed to.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think, and that's an awesome note to leave on. Just our sense of responsibility, and also creating a safe space for folks to be who they are or express themselves. And yeah, I think that's a excellent point to leave on. And
Thank you.
and thank you, Ferentz. I'm so glad. Just really happy to have you today, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to get to know you.
Hey, I've enjoyed every project we've been able to collaborate on, and
Same
as
here.
I said during the conversation, I think you speak to so many people through through the things that you've been able to bring out through the various tech and web projects, and I think you're definitely one of the affirming
Oh,
voices
thank you.
in Yale College.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So, Ferentz, again, we'll wrap up now. I wish I had 2 hours with you, because it's really fascinating just to hear about your experiences over the years. And again, I really appreciate everything you shared with us today, and I appreciate your time today. It's been a really just enriching conversation. I said this to Daisy Abreu, who was my first guest on the podcast.
Hmm.
Um, literally, I could hear music in my head, as we were talking about artists, but, just hearing about your experiences. Yeah, I just wish we had more time to talk about stuff. So maybe there's a part two somewhere in there, if you'll ever do it again. Um, but no, Ference, I'm sure that the students, they show their appreciation for, just everything that you've done over the years, and the contributions you've made to our student life here is has been amazing. So just thank you so much for, all of the insights that you shared today, and some of the stories that you had to share with us. I don't know if you have just any final things that you'd like to say or share with our listeners.
Um, Thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Mm.
I've enjoyed listening to the conversations with previous
Mm.
guests, and I'm
Thank
looking
you.
forward to subsequent seasons of the podcast.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Farron. So we'll wrap up the episode today. I always plug with, you can find us on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And we're also on Instagram. So look for us, Yale College Voices. And please like, share, follow, share with your friends, share with our staff. And again, just thank you for this conversation today. And it's been wonderful. So we'll sign off from here.